Some of the oldest artifacts on Earth are early watercraft. So humans, as a collective, have been taking to the waves for maybe millions of years. We know that we have been drawn to the sea for that long because artifacts from extinct human species have been found on islands which were never connected to the mainland. And in all that time, sometimes people ventured out into the ocean and never returned. The ocean is a place of more unsolved mysteries than perhaps anywhere else on Earth. Lists exist of people who vanished at sea going all the way back to the late BC era. Today, we are covering the stories of 5 more ships which vanished at sea along with those on board them. Like and subscribe if you like stories like this, and go check out the other videos on this topic, linked in the description. Enjoy! We're starting with the disappearance of the lovely SS Koombana. This lovely liner was launched on October 27th of 1908 and was a late Edwardian-era mail-carrying passenger and cargo ship registered in Australia. From 1909 to 1912, she operated along the northwestern section of the western coast of Australia, traveling back and forth from several ports. She was the first cargo ship built exclusively for service on the western Australian coast. Her interiors were designed with multiple areas for passengers to enjoy. Many were luxuriously decorated. They were well vented and comfortable. SS Koombana could carry her passengers within her accommodations on comfortable and fun crossings, up to 300 first and second saloon passengers. Her cabins even had electric fans and were also well vented. Now, similar to the SS Neuronic, which we covered in an earlier episode on this topic, Koombana had been designed with particular attention to the conveyance of livestock within her cargo facilities. Her main deck, foredeck, and aft deck were well equipped with special pens for transporting either 220 head of cattle or 1,500 sheep. Now, let's get to her disappearance in 1912. On Wednesday, March 20th, 1912, Koombana left for Broome in Western Australia, being followed by the SS Boolarra. There was a northeasterly wind blowing at the time. Captain Allen of the Koombana had noted that the barometer was falling, but merely thought the voyage might take longer than he expected. He and Captain Upjohn of the SS Boolarra thought nothing of it, having discussed the weather, but all too soon the weather would become a, quote, a howling hurricane, as described in the Boolarra's logbook. A few hours after departing, the two ships were struck by a massive gale. They altered course to head more to the north to escape it, but then they became separated. Boolarra suffered damage from the weather, but she limped into port, delivering her passengers safely. SS Koombana, however, was never seen again. Multiple vessels had been beached, wrecked, and sank in the storm, and the cyclone caused damage along 200 kilometers of coast. A search for the ship only turned up a piece of a starboard bow planking of a motor launch, a stateroom door, and a panel from the promenade deck, along with some air tanks and 2 planks for covering tanks of lifeboats. Other than the air tanks, everything was found at sea. A popular theory to explain Koombana's loss is that she capsized in the stormy seas. Some agreed, claiming the vessel was top-heavy, though her inaugural chief engineer disputed this. No definitive answer has ever been given, and the wreck of the Koombana is still missing. Until it is found, and she can tell us what happened, as even after all this time she would still bear the clues of what caused her loss, we can only speculate. A few anomalies have been located on the ocean floor in the area she likely vanished in, but to this day the wreck has never been found. This is an example of a ship which we know what happened to, but what remains missing is her wreck. The Hans Hedtoft was the last ship to sink with loss of life due to striking an iceberg. The story has some very interesting parallels to the loss of the Titanic in 1912, but the two should not be compared. Hans Hedtoft's story should be looked at on its own and not compared to the more famous Titanic. They were both their own tragedies, but the parallels are striking. They say history repeats itself, and in this case, it definitely did. Like the Titanic, Hans Hedtoft was thought to be the safest ship afloat, and some even thought she'd be unsinkable. We've heard that before. They said the same thing about the Waratah, too. We really have to stop calling ships that. Also like the Titanic, the Hans Hedtoft was lost on her maiden voyage after striking an iceberg. Again, these two stories should not be compared. Both were their own tragedies. I'm just pointing out some of the parallels between them. They're just really interesting. Now, let's cover the story of the Hans Hedtoft. In January 1959, she left Copenhagen, Denmark, on her maiden voyage. She was named after a Danish prime minister who had died in 1955. The Danish Ministry of Defense had also installed three 40mm anti-aircraft guns on the Hans Hedtoft to be used in the event of a war, though it was decided that these would be removed upon her return. Her radio call sign was OXKA. Her hull was also riveted, which was criticized as this was known to be more vulnerable due to ice compared to other modern hull designs. And if you're a ship operating in the North Atlantic Ocean, you are going to encounter ice. It's unavoidable. Hans Hedtoft finished the first leg of her maiden voyage in record time, arriving in Greenland, where she took on a cargo of literal tons of parish registers from parishes of Greenland. These were going to be placed within archives in Denmark upon Hans Hedtoft's return. She left for the return leg of her maiden voyage on January 25th. She had 40 crew, 55 passengers, and a cargo of frozen fish on board, along with the 3.25 tons of archives of Greenland's history and genealogy. Later the next day, a distress call was sent out. The Hans Hedtoft had struck an iceberg and was sinking. She was 35 nautical miles south of Cape Farewell, which is the southernmost point of Greenland. Local time was 1356, and the collision with the iceberg occurred at approximately 59 degrees 30 minutes north, 43 degrees 0 minutes west. The SOS was answered by other ships, but due to the weather, no one could get close. The weather also kept local coast guards grounded and unable to offer support from the air. An hour later, another SOS reported that the engine room was flooding. A final message was sent at 1741. It said the ship was slowly going down and it requested immediate assistance. A partial message was heard at 1806 local time, but it cut out and nothing else was heard from the ship. Either at that point, she lost power, or the wireless operator had to abandon his cabin, or, heaven forbid, maybe she even capsized and sank as the message was cut off. We'll never know. No trace of the ship outside of a single life preserver, which washed ashore 9 months after the sinking, has ever been found. Her wreck remains undiscovered as of April 2023. It's somewhere on the bottom of the North Atlantic Ocean. None of her passengers or crew survived the sinking. The search for any survivors was called off on February 7th, 1959, and the records she went down with were a massive loss for the history of Greenland and Greenlandic genealogy. Out of all the missing ships we've covered in this series, I think this one could probably be found if anyone actually went actively looking. We know the area she sank in, so I think we could probably find her if we just took the time to look. Her wreck could probably tell us a lot too, like where the iceberg struck the ship and what kind of damage it inflicted. Did it pop rivets or did it open a gash? And until we find the wreck, though, we can only guess. So we talked about this ship quite a bit in my video about the sinking of the Princess Alice, and I hinted that she had a mysterious fate. Well, now it is time for me to tell you what happened to her. Bywell Castle made her maiden voyage from London to a few ports throughout India in February 1870. She arrived in Bombay on the 16th of March 1870 after being delayed due to the steamer Brazilian running aground in the Suez Canal. Wow, well, once again, history repeats itself. Though she had good accommodations for her passengers, the ship was more built to carry cargo instead of people. She spent the next several years traveling around the Atlantic Ocean, from Africa and then to India and back to Europe. She was reboilered with new boilers in 1877. On the 3rd of September 1878, she collided with the steamship SS Princess Alice. Now, if you want to see that story, I'll link the video in the description. I'm not going to re-describe the whole thing here in case some of you have already watched it. Know, though, that the Bywell Castle was declared blameless for the collision. In May 1881, Bywell Castle discovered the passenger ship California in distress in the Atlantic Ocean. Her engines had broken down, so the Bywell Castle towed her into port at Halifax. In 5 days, 876 nautical miles. Bywell Castle was awarded £3,000 for the salvage for their efforts. In February 1883, Bywell Castle was reported missing. She had last been sighted on the 29th of January of that year on a voyage from Alexandria, Egypt to Hull, Yorkshire. She was carrying a cargo of beans and cotton. She was never seen again, and it's thought she was lost in bad weather due to being overladen. Her wreck has never been found, be it beached somewhere on some coast or island, or on some shoal, or down in deep water. Her entire crew was lost without a trace, along with the ship, and no trace of them or the ship has ever been found in the just over 140 years since she vanished. Her fate will likely remain a mystery forever, and I doubt her wreck will ever be found. Switching gears now, let's spend the rest of the video talking about some missing submarines that disappeared. There's a crazy amount of these, and these are just a few which I found interesting. U-116 was a Type XB mine-laying U-boat of Nazi Germany in World War II. She was ordered in January 1939 and laid down on July 1st of that year. She was launched on May 2nd, 2 years later, and commissioned under the command of Werner von Schmidt. She had 4 patrols in the Atlantic Ocean, beginning on April 4th, 1942. April 4th is actually the day I'm recording this, by the way, through September 1942. Her first 2 patrols were uneventful, but in her third, she torpedoed and sank the British ship Shaftesbury, which went under in 15 minutes. On her 4th patrol, U-116 was under the command of high-ranking individual Wilhelm Grimm. She left for the Atlantic Ocean on September 22nd, and her last radio message was sent on October 6th from the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean. This reported position was 45 degrees 0 minutes north, 31 degrees 30 minutes west. She was never heard from again, and she and her crew of 56 were never seen again. This is what I found so interesting about this one. They were in the middle of the ocean and just dropped off the face of the earth. I just want to know why, but we probably never will. I don't think her wreck will ever be found unless it's just by happenstance and luck. I just really wonder what made her disappear. It's stories like this that just really get my mind racing because it's just so mysterious. Her loss has never been explained, and it seems unlikely she was sunk by an Allied ship, so what happened, and where is her wreck? I love these kinds of mysteries. Something which vanishes so utterly at sea just has a way of making your mind wander and try to create a story. If anyone has any guesses about what happened to U-116, please tell me your theories. Sticking to submarines, this next one is another missing U-boat, U-337. She was a Type 7C U-boat. This type of U-boat has been called the workhorse of the German U-boat force, with 568 being commissioned between 1940 and 1945. The Type 7C was an effective fighting machine and was seen almost everywhere U-boats operated. Though their range was a bit limited, this, however, was made up for with their fighting capabilities. The most famous 7C U-boat was U-96, featured in the 1981 film Das Boot. U-337 was laid down in 1941 and launched in March 1942. She was under the command of Kurt Rauwiedel, who was a high-ranking lieutenant in the German Navy. The submarine was powered by 2 6-cylinder supercharged diesel engines producing a total of 2,800 to 3,200 metric horsepower for use on the surface. After training, U-337 was transferred to the 6th U-boat flotilla for frontline service in the Atlantic Ocean. On the 24th of December 1942, the U-boat was sailing west into the Atlantic Ocean, south of Iceland. Her final radio report was heard on January 3rd, 1943, which she gave her position as being 6 degrees north, 12 degrees west. And that's it. Just like with U-116, U-337 was never heard from again, and her loss remains a mystery. She is still classified as missing, and again, you just have to wonder what caused her loss. It's just another one of those baffling mysteries where you just have to sit and wonder what might have happened because we have no answers. It's the same kind of feeling you get thinking about the SS Pacific or the SS Warta. U-337 lies somewhere on the bottom of the North Atlantic Ocean, undiscovered. Until she is, we'll never know what happened. A misconception exists where some think she was actually sunk by a British flying fortress on the 15th of January 1943 southwest of Iceland with depth charges. This attack was actually against U-632 though, and no damage to the sub was inflicted. On screen now is a map showing U-337's final reported position. Each installment of this series has had a bonus story at the end, and this one is no exception. Though, like with the story of the Fleur de la Mar, this one is kinda cheating because we know what happened to this sub and where, but I thought it was an interesting story, so I wanted to tell it. We have another U-boat for this one, but unlike the others, this one's loss really isn't mysterious. What's missing is her wreck, like with the Hans Hedtoft. So, it's on theme. U-388 is basically... It's 338. There's a typo in my script. U-338 basically is U-337's sister. It was also a Type 7C U-boat. She was under the command of Manfred Kinzel. She was 220 feet long, laid down on April 4th. What's again with all these April 4ths going on right now? 1941. And commissioned on June 25th, 1942. She could operate as deep as 750 feet below the ocean surface. She had 3 patrols and was lost on the 3rd. Here is what happened. On the 20th of September, during her 3rd patrol, she was lost in an attack on convoy ON-202. She was spotted by a B-24 Liberator, an American heavy bomber patrol craft, and the Canadian corvette HMCS Drumheller fired her 4-inch gun at the U-boat. U-338 dived to avoid the attack. As the Canadian ship prepared to drop depth charges on her, her crew observed a large underwater explosion. U-338 was never heard from again, and it is assumed she was destroyed by damage from the shell fire. Her wreck has never been found and lies undiscovered somewhere on the bottom of the North Atlantic Ocean to this day. She sank 4 ships in her career and damaged a 5th. So, which story did you find most interesting? Honestly, for me, just because of the unsolved nature of it, it was the story of U-116. It is just one of those cases where something disappears completely and we don't know why. We don't have any answers. And in this case, it was in the middle of the ocean, too, making it even more mysterious. Anything could have happened. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want, there are more ships I could cover in the future. There's a lot more missing submarines, and honestly, I would like to talk about some more of them. But there are more ships I also would like to talk about, such as the SS Marine Sulphur Queen, which vanished in the Gulf of Mexico. It might be a bit before I do a part 4, though. I want to focus on some other topics for a bit, because I've been doing a lot of ship topics, so I want to switch it up a little bit. So until then, go check out my other videos on missing ships. I'll put them all in the description, and I hope you have a good one. Thank you for watching. Also, tell me in a comment if you'd be interested in a video like this, but instead of covering ships, I cover stories of planes which disappeared without a trace. Just tell me if you'd be interested in that. I'll see you in the next video.